Hi, this is David Douglas, Managing Director of EBO, the digital agency. EBO are the proud sponsors this year of RadioMoLI and MoLI's digital programme.
MoLI's learning programme is central to the museum's vision and purpose, stated as bringing visitors on an inspiring journey through Irish writing and encouraging them to explore their own creative potential. And so much of this was recognised in a Europa Nostra Grand Prix for citizens' engagement and awareness raising in 2023, the European Union's highest honour for culture and heritage. I'm Benedict Schlepper-Connolly, the museum's head of exhibitions, digital and programming. And in this conversation, I'm joined by Lily Cahill, MoLI's learning manager, and Jennie Ryan, head of learning and community. Jennie and Lily's work reaches thousands of young people and adults every year, both on-site here in St Stephen's Green and online across the island. All of this was made possible by the industry and passion of this small team, but also the support of many sponsors and partners, including Maples Group, AirCap, the Arts Council on Corla Allian, Dublin City Council, UNESCO City of Literature, All Funding, and UCD All. It's something that I see firsthand, making a real and transformative difference in people's lives, but also to the museum's wider activity and community. In this conversation, we take a look under the hood of MoLI's learning programme to find out more about the intention and realities of making all of this happen. We discuss how learning and the museum's mission are interconnected, bringing a lightness of touch to our learning programmes, the importance of people-centred learning, and how learning itself can be seen as a radical act. So we're here in the RadioMoLI studio. I'm joined by Lily Cahill, our learning manager, and Jennie Ryan, head of learning and community at MoLI. Lily Cahill is an artist, writer, curator, facilitator and the learning manager at MoLI. She is the winner of the Visual Artists Ireland Dublin City Council Art Writing Award and has written or performed her work for an array of galleries and venues, including the RHA, the Temple Bar Gallery and Studios, the Lab Gallery, Mermaid Arts Centre, Paper Visual Art and the School of Visual Culture at NCAD. Lily has facilitated many writing, art and creative projects with Temple Bar Gallery and Studios, the RHA, the Lab Gallery and of course at MoLI. Jennie Ryan is a purpose-led strategic and creative education leader with over 25 years experience across youth work, community development and arts-based education. She's spent her career collaborating with communities to make something new in playfully serious ways, bringing vision to life. A trustee of Access Ballymun in her hometown and the head of learning and community at MoLI, she builds diverse teams and delivers inclusive evidence-based programs that spark creativity and widen participation. Guided by the belief that excellence is everywhere, Jennie is committed to learning experiences that are both challenging and caring, provoking discussion, inviting more questions and leaving a lasting personal, social and cultural impact.
Boom! Boss, what a bio! Love it.
It's lovely hearing that all together, you know. Listen, I know you're like, boom, but hearing yours, Lily, was, of course, wonderful, out making things with people in the world. Yeah, great stuff.
So, in early 2019, the Museum of Literature Ireland was coming into being, with our historic site here in UCD Newman House undergoing a major redevelopment, exhibitions being finalised and the organisation's operations kicking into gear. Jennie, you arrived into the middle of this, something like a fireball, with the daunting task of establishing an ambitious education and learning programme. Can you talk us through some of the intentions and guiding thoughts you had at the time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's something significant around the time when I came in as well. And retrospectively, almost 7 years on, I think about the value of the courage to experiment, this vision that the board had for the mission and the values of the museum, but actually in the small team of which you were there at the start when I came in, was a real sense of we're in it together and we're on our way. We had, if you remember, a beautiful critical path spreadsheet, and we had very defined roles around what we were going to do to bring this vision to life. So there was this wide understanding that the very focus was to open the museum on Culture Night in 2019, but each of us played a very distinct part. But I think what's really beautiful about what became during that time is the interconnectedness of learning and the flow of that approach to the mission and the values that really was part of the fabric of how it was made up. A big thing that stands out for me was we ourselves hadn't physically seen the museum come to life just yet. So there's something innately creative about imagining an experience in your head and then trying to figure out what other people's ideas of how they're going to work in the physical space and how you can both complement that but also bring it to life, animate the museums, the gardens, and be a touch point for all the different work and the people coming through the building. So during that time, Simon O'Connor was our founding director. And I think so much about Simon at the time, he himself is a composer, but there was something about how he composed the different senior team there that he had a real trust in understanding that we were the right people to kind of birth MoLI into what it's meant to be. But there was a real strong roadmap, and the mission was that. And you talked about, like, what's the purpose of this? Yes, as a museum, but as a civic space, as a really valuable place where people can come, have a connection with, in particular, the art form in interesting and surprising ways, but perhaps leave inspired and kind of moved in different ways. And I remember I was brought up to the Lit Lab, which is our kind of multi-purpose educational space, and Simon saying to me, Jen, this is going to be the education space. It's going to be a dedicated space in the building. And, you know, initially this was offered to me as my office. But immediately I knew that the learning programme should have the best room in the house. And I suppose that added such wind to my sails around the value of learning in an organisation like MoLI, a brand new institution that really valued the fact that relationships, connections to the art form, being playful, slightly irreverent, was the way to go. And I think that was just a wonderful thing. And that is my background, I suppose. My background is really working with startups. I have a lot of startup energy. So I have a lot of energy to kind of get things moving. And I was chatting to Lily earlier, like I get giddy and excited with other people's perspectives and other ways of perhaps looking at things and doing things and working together towards a goal. So I believe from day one, that was something that Simon, as our leader, really expressed to us. So I felt a lot of trust in me, and it just felt like we were making something special with people.
So we opened the museum September 2019. 6 months later, the COVID-19 pandemic hit. And to state the obvious, this was a hugely traumatic and disruptive time for so many, including for our immediate community here at the museum. But it was also a moment in which our learning programme shifted a gear. Could you tell me a bit about how you responded in this time and maybe what this revealed about the power of learning within the museum context, within the context of everybody's experience of the pandemic as well?
Yeah. I think Jenny can speak to this because I know that there had been plans for learning to eventually make online programs, right? Mm-hmm. But because COVID hit, you had to drag that into the present, right? So you had to think fast, and we had to make online content earlier than I think you had planned.
Well, I actually think there's perhaps even something, if we go back around even when you came in, you had set up RadioMoLI before I had come in, which retrospectively may have been thought as quite a kind of unique twee idea, but actually what it is a digital online repository and exhibition space that created a space and a willingness, actually a runway for us to be digitally competent and have a courage to experiment within that kind of realm. So yes, the willingness is always that your programs kind of grow, and stories should grow beyond the physical space that you're in. There's no doubt about it. MoLI vibrates. The very history of the museum, the architecture museum and garden, it vibrates in a very different way. But there's also something about decentralising culture that is fundamental to really, I think, the longitudinal influence any institution has. So yes, we would have, but I will say that the track was laid before us, really. And I think what happened with lots of learning programs at that time was largely learning can be seen as something on the side, hooked on to perhaps the bigger purpose of any organisation. So what I mean by that is something exists, and learning is taking that something as an inspiration and a well to create something else with other people. But even when you root everything back to what the mission of MoLI was, which is to collect, preserve and interpret these materials, so we're talking about our Joycean artefacts, things like that, and encourage an exploration of creativity, reading and writing through educational and artistic interventions. It's a very live, present thing to do. So our mission is celebrating Ireland's literary heritage, but it's also very much about being a live laboratory. And I mean, at that time, the value of words, do you remember even at the time we had our own president and Taoiseach quoting Seamus Heaney, we all found it to be a deep comfort and a salve for us all, and we understand the world in a very different way through language. So even in terms of the art form, we were perfectly placed to actually be accessible. So often when we started in MoLI, there was a consideration, it's a real thing, where literature is considered with a capital L, but actually through my life and through my life's work, what I've found is, and I've spent my life working in different communities with different art forms, I have found when you're working with stories, plays, poems, once you set a scene and create a space, it really is a kind of springboard for really interesting connection and storytelling, and it allows us as humans, going back to Joycean's stream of consciousness, language isn't this fixed thing. Sometimes stories close us in, but the more that you use it as a form of expression, it opens up possibilities. And I think the art form already being digitally, structurally set up, and a willingness, we work in a way where it's about working with people. You know, it's not about us saying, well, we know the art form and let us pour into you. You know, how about this as a reciprocal, changing, living thing? And so it's very true. Everything kind of comes back to the purpose of why we're here as a museum, you know. So if we're a living laboratory, what does that then mean? It's in a pandemic. It means the same thing on a Tuesday on a normal day. It means taking the subject, taking the stories as a starting point, but also recognising we the culture. People bring their own stories and experience to things, and you meet people where they're at. And that's where you go to somewhere kind of special, I think. During that time, a really exciting project happened. AirSat 1, space poetry. We were all part of a group of people who produced a poem with young writers in JCSP Deaf schools and poets from UCD, and an etched poem is on Ireland's first satellite into space. So there were all these kind of really interesting opportunities that came about because we weren't so set up and formed and calcified to be like, well, we only do things one way. Okay? So what it allowed us to do was go, well, there's things we could do, there's things we should do, but then there's things we have to do because of this moment in time. And so the AirSat 1 project is really, really a powerful project that we worked on at the time that we're really proud of. And also Sarah Webb, who's an amazing champion of children's writers and a kind of brilliant person herself. She did creative birth with us at the time, which was like every day before schools had kind of formalised the what they were doing in lockdown. We started to notice that they were sticking Sarah Webb's and MoLI's creative bursts on the homework for families to do at home. So we really recognised that space for that.
I suppose something I witnessed in that time, Lily, is how your engagement with people in the building here is so full of kind of joy and colour and it's you know it's really intimate in the senses that you really engage with people, but you've managed to funnel that into the online sphere, which is one of the hardest things to do, and you have that same interaction with people whether they're in a school down the road or whether they're on an island off the west coast of the country. And I'm really curious as to how you did that, and people still feel like they're getting that really kind of up close sense of attention and interaction with what you're doing.
People have colour and joy anyway, but I think maybe they feel that they can't bring that into institutions. So I think a good way to start with people is to show them that they can bring in whatever they are. So I'm pretty silly straight away, to show people that I'm silly and maybe colourful, to use a polite. My dad would call people colourful if maybe he didn't like them. Whatever, yeah. So I'm kind of silly and I'm colourful, but and I work here. So I think by showing that to people, it's like I'm institutionally sanctioned. I work here. So, and if I'm a goon, you can be a goon too. We can all be ourselves here. And I try and put that forward very quickly over Zoom as well. So I'll dance. I'll say straight away, I'm going to ask some questions today, but there's no wrong answers. I don't know the answer to everything. I have to ask my co-workers for help all the time. Yeah, I don't know. And I say this all the time, and it's probably clear to use as my co-workers of the past 6.5 years. But I don't, it takes a lot for me to get embarrassed. And I think that's handy when you're working with other people. 'Cause I'll get stuff wrong and be a goon. And I think that helps other people take chances themselves.
I mentioned in 2023, MoLI was awarded a Europa Nostra Grand Prix in recognition of so much of both of your work. And the Europa Nostra jury singled out MoLI for its work as a heritage project fostering social cohesion, inclusion, multicultural dialogue, and nurturing a sense of place and belonging. They said this community museum in Dublin, a UNESCO City of Literature, has established itself as a strong advocate for engagement and inclusivity. The Museum of Literature Ireland actively celebrates diversity and promotes creativity and artistic expression. The museum's effort to address the declining interest in literature among young people is commendable, as it ensures that the art form remains accessible and relevant. So I suppose I'm curious to know what the award meant for you at that time.
Can I just say something before I hand it to the big
No,
dog?
but what? No, you don't have to hand this to me.
Because for listeners, right? A Europa Nostra award is apparently a really big deal, and I'd heard nothing about it. It's a really big deal, and it was especially a super big deal because we're only a baby in the museum stakes. But just to give context, because when we won that, I was like, I don't know what that is, and I don't really care. But it's important.
Yeah.
That answers the question, Lily.
Yeah. Do you know what I think the significance of winning that award is? It was an acknowledgement that they could see that we understood what we were doing, why we were doing it, and had a real understanding that it was in the how, it was in the context making, the meaning making, the relationships. It was in all of that and the kind of amalgamation of all, learning and exhibitions and that interconnectedness of all of our different ideas of what this mission is. And when I talk about the kind of how we do it, it's really about the values we hold. And I know among the three of us, goodwill is just so prescient in everything that we try, I'll say, disclaimer, try to do, right? Because naturally when you're purpose driven, you're hooked into the why you're doing what you're doing, and it's painting a picture for you. But then when you've certain behaviours, which is really your values, how you hope to live through to get to the point where you need to go through, which is the vision and the mission and things like that, it's really good to have a shared common language around that. And I think what that actually the Europa Nostra did was it could feel those values living through the work in a very unique way. So myself and Lily, a lot of the time we would say, every time we're talking to people, we would say, look, I'm Jennie, I'm Lily, we're a Museum of Literature Ireland, but we want to do a project with you, might come where we want to work with people. But a lot of the times it's kind of grassroots, literally from during lockdown, there were people walking outside from different kind of local agencies, kind of family support workers who wondered what was going on in there, and then they were sent to us. Staff would send them to Lily and I, and some really interesting programming with the local community came about through that. So when we talk about goodwill, we talk about, leading with a lightness of approach, like lads. As my 15-year-old son would say, it's not that deep. But it actually, we're deadly serious about going, how often lightness of touch is not taken seriously when in fact it's the number one indicator of really good relationships, and it's a really settling emotion where people, particularly in a museum of literature, in these trophy buildings that have so much history and weight to it, it's really actually disjointing for people when they meet us, because they're like, oh, you're very normal. We hear lots of you're very normal, so I don't know what they expected to see. But in many ways, I do understand what they expect to see. So when we talk about goodwill, we're talking about that kind of lightness of approach, and going back to what Lily said, it's really about just kind of being yourself, really. And when you're being yourself, you will give people permission to wholly be themselves, and you're meeting them where they're at. But we also have a real honesty and accountability with the way we work. Now, not to get technical, but that also comes into really good comms. So we understand that it's relational, and it's about trying to work together with people in a really kind of meaningful way, whereby nothing's quite fixed. Yes, you have a budget, you have an outcome, we have a purpose, they have a purpose, we kind of know what we want to do, but you're also, so we've got the rail guards up, but you also have this space for something very special to become what it needs to be. And I think that value of goodwill is just follows us through that process. And then education and creativity are other two anchors, which are also key values in MoLI. And right, if you stick those three circles right in the centre of that Venn diagram, I would stick encourage to experiment, because a lot of the time when you work in learning, naturally it needs to be formalised. You're working with different people, you're looking at safeguarding, all of these things matter, policy, and these are things you're creating at the same time because you're only opening a museum. So you got to get these things in place. But it really matters that people know what they're getting into at the same time too. And so it allows that sense of fun to kind of creep in as well. So yeah, we're really values led, and the courage to experiment, I would say, is trusting the process and trusting the goodwill. Goodwill is reciprocal and it's kind of endless. So you trust that things will not go the way you want them to do, but that's okay because you have a debrief after each session, and also you have a relationship to pick up a phone and call and say, listen, that didn't work, what can we do better? We fail better, as Sam and Becca might say. So there's something really beautiful in that, I think.
We spoke earlier, we've been speaking about how you reach into people's lives in a really meaningful and profound way. Through your work, including free tours and workshops for schools, online workshops across the island, creative writing programs, and so much more. One thing I've always been impressed by as a colleague, against the backdrop of relative chaos in my own work, is your sense of rhythm and balance across the year. Talk us through what a typical few months looks like for you and some of the programs that you run, so that people can really get a sense of the breadth of your work.
Oof. So let's do September to December. What does those few months look like? Okay, so we've got our bread and butter, the schools programs. So Tuesdays, we've secondary schools into us, 1st to 4th years. They do a workshop, they do a tour with us. Wednesdays, we've primary schools into us. They also do a workshop and tour with us. Thursdays, we're online to schools all over the island doing MoLI in the classroom, where we zoom into primary and secondary schools. Then on Thursday afternoons for the last while, we have been working with a couple of different wonderful writers. We've recently been working with Liz Houchin, who is just a glorious person, writer and facilitator, and we've been working with Liz and a group of brilliant characters, very colourful, as my dad would say, and myself, but not in the bad way, in the amazing way. Very colourful people from the City of Dublin Education and Training Board, and their teachers. So we do that on Thursday afternoons. Friday afternoons, sometimes we have Dublin City Council's Culture Company Culture Club in to visit us. They'll be in to visit us for a free tour and workshop. September to Christmas is one big bulk of work. Oh, and then we've got our intern programs, which is also part of our work. We've got all this other stuff that's part of our work that I can't remember. So that's a big lump of stuff. Then we'd have a break, and then we go again from kind of January to about May, but then we got to take some time off so that we don't get to June and collapse.
I think as well there's something there. First Fridays.
First Fridays. We do First Fridays.
We all do First Fridays together, where we have writing workshops for teenagers, 15 to 19-year-olds in the Lit Lab, and then gloriously in the last year, the Daedalus Library was the membership library, and that's now moved downstairs in the building in St. Stephen's Green. And actually what it has done is it has opened up the Daedalus Library for free public programming. And I think that that's what's really interesting about the work that MoLI does actually is, I don't think we've mentioned it just yet, every single thing that we do in learning is free. And it's free because of, naturally, the investment of the National Library of Ireland and UCD came together to form this new cultural institution. But also we have these brilliant partners who are supporting the work so that it can be free to access for different people across different ages across the island of Ireland. And I mean, that is incredible. We always collect data, so we always collect feedback on programs from participants, you know, what they expected, expectations versus reality, really looking at the gap, and then just seeing ways that we can just kind of iterate and go again. And we constantly do that. And since 2021 January, we've worked with 16,500 individuals. Now, when I say that, that's a big number, but I'm actually going to even multiply that number, because every single one of those individual people have spent a minimum of 1 hour and 30 minutes in with us doing creative programs. So if you multiply that, right, it's 25,000 hours of guided creative time, free creative learning, using literature, stories, and connection as key points in their life, in their day. And that's what we do in MoLI. And it's kind of profound to think of it in that way, that so many people have come, and we do things slightly differently in MoLI. And maybe this is also says something about what the Europa Nostra saw. When people come into us for a workshop and then a tour, we start with people. So we start in the room and we do workshops where people's stories come alive.
Yeah.
So it's learner-centred. So it's about what they think, what they understand literature to be, what stories resonate with them. And then when they go on the tour, whatever comes up then is basically mirrored in the bespoke tour that came up in the room. And they're having a conversation with literature and place in Newman House, and building community and an understanding of self, and so many other things we know from feedback that people say. So I just think that's kind of amazing that a new institution would green light this, and a huge thanks to all of our supporters and sponsors as well.
So we naturally have quite an interest in words in this museum. I'm interested in the choice of the word learning, which I know was a deliberate choice over terms such as education or outreach that you might get in other museums. We speak often about MoLI being a learning organisation, and I think that's an expression that has very long tendrils across the whole museum operation. So can you tell me a little bit about what this word learning means to you? And I'm also thinking back to a conversation we had over a coffee a little time ago, where you said learning is a radical act, and I thought that was such an interesting idea. So could you tell us, Jenny, a little bit about that?
Yeah, I suppose so many of the kids and people that I grew up in Ballymun in the 70s and the 80s. You know, there were articles written at the time that if you were born in Ballymun, you were born a social problem. You know, the possibilities for the life that you were going to have were limited to what you could see. The narrative of my life was formed from the outside in, but it seeps into your soul. And it really changes the way you see yourself, your community and the world. However, in 1989 in Ballymun, there was a thing called the Ballymun Initiative for Third Level Education. And it was a scholarship programme. And my class year, and another school in Limerick, I think at the time, were selected to be this kind of social equity experiment. And I remember the first time in my life I'd heard the word aspiration. So apologies now, I can't remember who the original program director of that was at the time, but she spoke with such a delicate care and really love of place of Ballymun and the people who worked there, and spoke about my family, our accents, our culture, our history with such care, but also then opened a window to other possibilities. And really that sticks in my head as a really formative point in my life around education being something that I feel it in my body. You know, it's a felt sense thing, but it is this idea that where you are now isn't where you're always going to be. And also there's endless possibilities when you look at learning and stories. It brings me back to one of our programs with Hale Housing, was really around, it was with peer-led kind of poets and writers as well. And Chiamaka Enyamadi was an incredible facilitator for that program. But the name of that project was called Our Stories Aren't Laminated. And I get goosebumps every time I think that. And that was a participant who named that program in that way. So there was a real understanding there around sometimes education for many people, including my own family members, including people I love, including communities I've worked in, has been very different. It's not a set path for everybody. There's a great kind of, God, what a gift if it is. But what I found in my life, the most interesting people who approach life as this breath of wonder are lifelong learners. So it's not feeling things are fixed, feeling like it's an opportunity to change and open out rather than close on in or perhaps redirect. So when I think of learning and I think of literature, and Luke, who's one of our original tour guides, he says this so well, and sometimes I'll hide around corners when he's given tours because he speaks to both the language. He speaks to James Joyce, who for the first time, when I read Ulysses out loud, for example, it sounds like me. Like lots of the characters sound like me with a Northside Dublin accent, which is totally at odds with people's perception of what Ulysses is. So even the learning for me that I'm so welcome and my voice is in this tome, this museum that celebrates that piece of work is kind of joyful. And it all's weaved into this wonderful learning. We are many. Yes, we may come if we're lucky enough. Sharon Olds says we get a chance to bloom. And it's that wonderful thing, I think, in this job. If you're working and learning, it's both confronting. You're coming up against beliefs about yourself, about the world personally we are all of the time. And I think when you use the term learning, it's about it being a finding place. And my quote, my most used JJ quote that I use in the particular is contained the universal. And I think that says so much about learning. You know,
Mind's mistakes are the portals of discovery.
Boom. Also amazing strength-based learning mindset.
I say that about 7 times a week, I'd say.
I think my perception of it has always been, you know, education feels like something that is done to people, and learning is something that's so much more collaborative or involved, involving. So it's always seemed really suitable.
That's true, because with learning, we're not saying who's doing the learning. And we ask everybody that works with us for feedback. So the teachers that are in with us on site every week, they're given forms to fill in, and young people, the babies in primary school and the secondary school students are given post-its to write their own kind of TripAdvisor review. Like, we want to know what you think we could be doing better. How could this room be more comfortable for you? What did we forget? Who's left out? What did we forget to do? So me and Jenny are learning. We always say this, that it's like,
every day's a school day.
Every day's a school day. And working here for me has been like college where I'm getting paid. But and maybe not making as big of messes as I did in college. But it's like college, you know, we're working on all these different projects all the time. And we've had to learn stuff like Zoom or whatever, you know, we've had to learn and adjust, and we're still doing that because we're working with lots of different groups of people from loads of different backgrounds, and you're learning stuff from them all the time as well.
We do, I suppose, learning, when I think of learning, and you can only learn when you've time for reflection. So we would kind of 3 times a year kind of do a review, evaluation, and then look ahead. Because I think so often you can just get in the rhythm of doing. And actually what I've found out and continue to find out is that when you don't take a breath to pause and reflect, like actually actively have the day to do it, you don't also take the wins. And I think a big thing for us, Ben, when we were setting up the museum was like, well, how do we create an actual organisation where the people who work there also feel that these values are coming alive for them?
Absolutely.
And so that's really important to us at a very fundamental level. Like when I used to work in youth work for many moons over kind of Dublin 17 and 5-17, we were always reminded our facilities at times were falling apart. Our laptops were being, you know, they were broken. You know, it was at times in terms of financial resources, it was difficult. We had a brilliant manager and he used to say, folks, never remember, people come back for feelings, not facilities. And I think that feelings linger. And so for all of us as a whole cohort within this museum of MoLI, from the visitor experience to the events, to the shop, to the digital exhibitions and programming, to our volunteers, our interns, our work experience program with teenagers, they are always, they mention that they feel something happening in MoLI. And I do believe it's because from day one we wanted that to come alive through the staff, which is the ultimate community development approach. You know, because ultimately the people who work here are the greatest champions for the work. And actually a lot of the time some of our best programming has come from people who are volunteers or we work with, who would say, actually, there's someone I know who's doing a really interesting project. Can you meet with them? We're like, yes, let's do it. So there's going back to that kind of interconnectedness of us all within MoLI, and the form of that learning takes, which is both amorphous and tentacle-like and seeping. That's the seeping. Maybe not. Seeping sounds a bit pungent, but in a joyful perfumery way.
Because we're, and again, I bang on about this all the time, I'm sorry to both of you, but the museum is a museum, but the museum is an employer. And that's really significant. The values of MoLI, the 7 values that we have, the goodwill, the courage to experiment, the creativity, the equality, that applies to our projects and our programs and how we embrace and engage with visitors, but it applies to the staff. And that those 7 values have enabled us to make the work that we make, I think.
We're here in MoLI in UCD Newman House, which is the historic home of the university, which is a house with a very storied and literary history, a stunning architecture, both old and new, beautiful and serene gardens and a very famous ash tree. And a range of exhibitions diverse in both form and in subject, with some of the warmest and friendliest museum staff in the city. We've spoken about how you inspire people through your work, but Lily, are there ways in which the museum and the environment inspires you?
Okay, well, working somewhere like here and having access to front of house and back of house in a building like this and in a museum, wouldn't call it inspirational. I'd call it wild. like for me as a person to work in a place like this. I think a lot of us feel it. You know, we feel this building is ours. We're running up and down the back servant stairs. It's our building. And that's kind of like ludicrous to me. Is that inspiring? I don't know. But that must come through, I suppose, in the work. Like, I'm walking across Stephen's Green still now, and you pass JJ's head looking at the building, and you see the building coming, and still now I'm like, especially when it's dark and the lights are on, you're coming back from whatever, you're like, Jesus, I cannot believe I work here. It's an amazing place, and if I still feel like that, you understand how the kids coming in, the building seems so mysterious and cool. And with adult groups and stuff that we're coming up to work in rooms. Jenny mentioned the old members library, which now we get to use for adult workshops. And you're coming into that room. We have our youth advisory panel of young people who give us feedback and kind of critique the museum. Jenny, which I totally forgot that we do, along with lots of other things like our work experience programme, our work with Catherine McGully. I forgot about a lot of things. Anyway, I haven't answered the question. Yes, it inspires me.
Do you know, when you were talking there's two pieces of programming that really stand out to me, and one is, you touch on it there, is Catherine McCauley School, which is the reading school in Baggot Street, which we have a really strong kind of historical, almost 7 years relationship with. And it's a school for young people with dyslexia. And early on, how we developed our schools programme is with schools. So we developed it with schools across the city, from deaf schools to private schools, and then different kind of educational needs schools. I'm going to tell you something. If you ask people what they think and they know they're not going to offend you, you get the greatest answers. And you get the greatest programs, because you know it's hitting the right spot. You're giving people what they want and more, because people, when they feel their opinion is welcome, they give you more, and that's a wonderful thing. But talking about the physical space in the building, Catherine McCauley School with Liz Huchin and Lily, they've worked on a programme called Wondering and Wandering, which we think is very, Joycean as well. But in particular, what I think is interesting about the physical space and the art form, and Joyce, for example, is Liz decided that the group over the 4 weeks, we recognise that there's different ways of learning. There's different wisdom that everybody has. And if we use the physical space, for example, the strawberry tree out in the courtyard became a key character over the 4 weeks of that learning programme. And they brought the strawberry tree on adventures from Dublin to far wild off places, and they went with the tree. So even in terms of how the physical space inspires us, and in turn when we're working with other artists and we're getting them to use the museum and gardens as inspiration for how they're going to facilitate, it actually is deeply embedded in the work that we do. And the second piece of programming that really comes up for me is the CDETB adult literacy team. We started to work with them maybe over 3 or 4 years ago, and we have a programme called Museums as Adult Friendly Learning Spaces, and part of that programme is really looking at learners who perhaps, number one, have never gone to a museum before. So there's that. There's also learners who specifically we're looking at in terms of adult literacy. So if you're a literature museum, how can you genuinely be a welcoming space regardless of literacy levels? And then inviting these amazing people with their own wonderful life experiences to have a creative experience in the museum, but also to audit a museum of literature from their perspective. Was a key part of that programming, and it kind of ended with all of MoLI staff, including yourself, Ben, and volunteers, to have training in adult literacy, really, and how do you work with people. And as we know, what works for everybody tends to be the best way of communicating. But as part of one of our community development programs, which is what we would call the CDETB work, maybe 2 years ago, one of the adult literacy facilitators said to us, when we moved from the Lit Lab, which at the time had this amazing mural by Chloe, the incredible street artist who's part of the Meenock Collective. She created this kind of wild flowers around the space. And we realised very quickly as a museum, initially we started off saying we're going to work with young people, and then the creative interventions will develop and grow as the young people grow. But actually what COVID did was accelerate the relationships we already had, both beyond MoLI for me, so like previous relationships and programs that I'd worked in, and then we started to work with adult audiences in a different way. And very quickly we realised the room was too busy. And if you're also looking at storytelling, slowing down in a different way, it can kind of infantilise the work. So we moved into the Daedalus Library around 2 years ago for that programme, and one of the members had said it feels like we're being allowed into the good room in the house, the parlour. And I thought, God, that's really of its time. I was thinking about going to my granny out in Ballyfermot, and she had a parlour that you couldn't go into, but I thought there was something beautiful about naming it, Ben. Naming it like, well, perhaps these rooms and doors weren't open to me. And actually, physically, that room wasn't open to the public until the library moved downstairs. So it's really interesting how the physical space has informed the progression of how we work with people. And what came first, chicken or egg, you know? I'll tell you what a permanent is, the building. It's been here long before us and has had many lives. Yeah. And it will be here long after us, and isn't that a wonderful thing?
With that in the space, and I say this in MoLI in the classrooms to the kids online, when I'm showing the building and talking about MoLI, that buildings that were originally built as I put it, party houses for rich people, it is amazing now that the function is being useful to the community. So it's really cool that the Europa Nostra people called us a community museum, because kind of I think, you know, we always refer to the Lit Lab as being a community centre on the 4th floor, but to think about the whole museum as being like a community centre now, which is like totally opposite to being a party house for rich people. So I think about that now, that the building is being put. Now I'm glad the rich people existed so that we have these these gorgeous buildings, but I am so glad now that they're open and accessible to the public for us all to run amok. And the garden, which people don't even know the ivy gardens are there, let alone our back garden. Yeah.
It turns out we have a lot of connection to the physical. You know, at the start it was like, well, what connection do we have? But it's so multi-layered. Yeah. There. My greatest feeling is when I get to the lift on level 1, and I'm usually going up to level 4, which is where the Lit Lab is, and Lily and my office is. But if you turn to face the Ivy Gardens, it's a beautiful glass lift, and you can see the copper filigree. Is that what it's called?
Sounds good.
Well, yeah, which the architects used as the exact same colour that was in each of the houses' stone. Ooh. And so that's kind of, I like to call it like a beautiful veil. And as you're moving up through the building. So you're going from the aula level and you're moving up and you're getting to see the Reader's Garden. And then you're looking over the walls of the museum into the Ivy Garden. There's something really powerful about that moment for me. Like, I'm a big believer in thresholds generally, you know. You're moving from one space to another. So there's something profound being a worker here for me in that experience. It kind of gets me into a certain mode, because I'm stepping out onto the learning space and into our office and by the recording studio here as well.
We've spoken about MoLI's sense of ambition early on, very much rooted in the vision and sensibility of the founding partners and team for the museum. When you look ahead 10, 20, 30 years from now, Jenny, what do you think or hope we'll be saying about the museum's contribution to learning?
I think learning lives within people. And I think from the offset, there was a real kind of meta understanding that, yes, we might have a museum of literature, but the only way to reputationally and actually on a very felt, real level bring it alive is through people. And my experience, and I've been working since I'm 15 as a volunteer. I used to help my sister, who was a facilitator at the time, go around with youth groups doing drama workshops. And so I've always known the value of bringing people together in a very particular way. Maybe you might have a theme. Maybe it's just you need to keep people busy. Maybe you have an art form that you're going to work with. And actually, I'm doing it a really long time now. And what it tells me is that we won't be around for when many of these seeds will bloom. But I trust that will be our greatest legacy, is how we invest, how a museum, a new cultural institution, invests into people and has been a place of welcome. So often when I was starting off, it was talking about literature is inaccessible or the art form, and we're going to work with disadvantaged, marginalised groups. Thank goodness that language is changing, because it's never been about people being hard to reach, ever, when it comes to institutions. It's very much always been about something else, and barriers and blockages to welcoming people in, and a warmth of welcome. And I think when you work with people together in a creative way, it waters a part of the soul and the psyche and the body in a very different way, where it can really change how you think about yourself and your community and the world. So, long story short, how I think about this is we have programs that we ran, for example, the Edna O'Brien Young Writers Awards, that ran for 5 years. And that was for teenagers between the age of 15 to 17 years. And they would work with a writer of note, and they're amazing writers through the years. And they'd spend a summer residential together in MoLI, and they'd stay in UCD residences. UCD all were an amazing partner on that project, and it was made happen through the Arts Council Young Ensembles and also a private donor. It was an incredible programme. Part of that programme was that they had an anthology or a booklet produced during that week. And generally the writers had a theme. Alan McMonigal, he actually did his one in COVID, so did Sarah Maria Griffin. But then we had the amazing Colin Keegan and Jessica Traynor. And then for our final year, we had Colin McCann. And these are young people coming from all walks of life. And by design, Ben, very much our programmes are marketed, very direct marketing to corners and doors and halls of people and communities, because going back to that idea of excellence is everywhere, you just need to look for it. And honest to God, it's that easy, because what we have found through the years of that 5-year programme was the most talented young writers who had something to say had very unique lived experiences that if we hadn't directly marketed and tried to reach out in that way, we would have never known. And they were blindly judged. So it's not like, you let everyone in because it's a nice thing to do. No, you are finding talent in corners that need to have light spotlighted onto them. And so I will say, from my experience in my whole life of doing this work, is if you're a touch point, and it can be just once, it can be a 2-hour workshop. If you're a touch point in people's lives where there's some type of creative movement or transformation, it is remembered and felt in the body and the mind. And then as they move through the world and that gets watered elsewhere, you're always a part of their life journey and their history. So you're creating these champions, these advocates, these creatives who go out into the world. And it's 10 years' time, 20 years' time, where we've exhibitions on these young writers. They talk about being kind of nourished and supported at really kind of influential stages of their lives. And that's what the Edna O'Brien programme really did for 5 years. So I'm exceptionally proud of that. A lot of my work is trusting the process, and I know great things will bloom from that, just like they have done in so many ways in the last kind of almost 7 years. And the best ways things bloom is when they become what they need to be. And looking ahead, I suppose that's the wonderful thing about learning, is that it's always full of possibility.
Jenny, you have a lovely publication on the table in front of you. So tell us a little bit about this.
Yes, so part of the Edna O'Brien Young Writers Award, we published these amazing anthologies. And in my hand, I have a beautiful, I would call it peachy pink covered with a gorgeous French flap booklet called These Tender Hooks for the Edna O'Brien Young Writers Bursary. It was called Bursary and then changed to Award in 2022. Now, the writer of note is an incredible writer called Colm Keegan. And as part of the booklets, what happens is the director of MoLI tends to have a forward in some way, and then the mentor for the year writes a beautiful piece. So I thought it might be lovely to read the final paragraph that Colm Keegan wrote in October 2022 about the Edna O'Brien Bursary. And so to finish with one word, forward. This is a forward, by the way, not forward. I always have to correct myself. Or maybe I shouldn't correct myself. Maybe this is the biggest forward I get to give. The big push that all writers deserve. Forward into usurping, into rooms where you turn over tables and grab the microphone. Forward into standing against all who refuse to listen. Forward into standing up for anyone who hasn't gotten a voice as strong as yours yet. Forward into the rooms where people like you are ignored. Forward into listening, into places you don't understand but want to understand. Forward into each other's lives, each other's writings, each other's dreams. Forward into the future that some already describe as inevitable, but that, like the twisting and turning sentences we played with all week, is open to your intervention and redirection. Forward into inspiring others with your seeking, the way you inspired me. Forward into light, into art, into realising your potential. Forward into your adventure.
You've been listening to a conversation with MoLI's Head of Learning and Community, Jennie Ryan, and MoLI's Learning Manager, Lily Cahill. I'm Benedict Schlepper-Connolly, the museum's Head of Exhibitions, Digital and Programming. For more about learning at MoLI, visit moli.ie/learning. For more from RadioMoLI, visit radio.moli.ie.